This podcast is a part of the More Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Daily Leader Podcast by Pattern Talent, where we interview great leaders and we seek to understand leadership. I'm Brad McDonald.
And I'm Taylor Jessup, and we really hope that you enjoy this episode.
Oh man, that was good. That was good. All right. Lounge episode, man. I don't know. This is lounge episode 4 or 5. Point of the lounge is
No clue.
we have no idea. We're actually just talking about that. Now we want to get in, we want to dive into some of our episodes that we've recorded with our amazing guests and kind of dig deep, put some hands and feet to what you and I have actually been learning as a result of those times. Cause I feel like I've learned a ton. I don't know about you.
I do. I think what a incredible blessing and privilege to be able to spend 4 hours talking to these 4 different individuals, and just that I, in my daily work with clients, reflect on what I learned from these conversations all the time. And so I think each of these individuals brought an interesting and unique perspective on this question, what is leadership and how do we do it?
Yeah.
And I think, man, I just really enjoyed the prep for today's conversation. I really enjoyed re-listening to these. I enjoyed just the process of reflecting on, man, how have I been working this information and this perspective out in my daily leadership? So I'm stoked to get to share some of these key highlights.
Yeah, super great. And one of the things that we don't say often, Brad, for both of us, in particular you, because you've been in it longer, but both of us are in the coaching game. So it is not even just a, hey, this is great that this stuff affected us, wonderful, la-di-da. But this is a, hey, actually, practically, these are things that we take in with our clients all the time and have such an impact on us and the way that we work. The way that I work at Bar Agency on my day-to-day and Bar Coaching on, the coaching side. And I think the same for you. There's actual, tangible, what am I trying to say? There's a familiarity with what we learn and then putting that into play. So we get the opportunity to kind of go through that today with Cory, Tim, Adrian, and Jenn, which were all fantastic, super good episodes. I really enjoyed all of them. So I think Cory, let's just, and we'll say this for our listeners. If you haven't listened to these episodes, definitely go back and listen to them. There's a bunch of short content. Brad is Between Two Books. It's like that show Between Two Ferns. It was on Netflix a long time. I don't think that's in it. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, you're behind in between 2 of his books, Rise and Go and Win It Home First with Cory. So, Brad, kick us off.
Can I just show the audience I'm a huge fangirl. So I got the Rise and Go mug.
Yeah, you do.
I got the Rise and Go coaster. Okay. So Cory, shout out to you. We love you. Thank you so much for joining us on the Daily Leader.
That's right.
And so Win It Home First introduction. There's a Steve Marabelli quote, and it says, "An inch of action is worth a mile of intention." And I just think that is such a key principle for any leader to grab a hold of. If you want to lead, and we talked about this a lot with Cory, we talked about this with Tim as it related to permission versus position. We talked about this with Adrian on impact versus intention. We talked about this with Jenn around, how we communicate is just as important as what we say. When she shared a really interesting story of when she made a mistake as mayor in holding a constituent accountable or a partner accountable. We might have intentions as a leader. They don't matter nearly as much as what we actually do, as the reality of what we create. And so, these Leadership Lounge episodes are about you and I taking action and sharing with our listeners how we've been taking action on what we've been learning. And so I think that that's the power in it. And I think what an incredible way to kind of kick off a book, which I really appreciate about When at Home First. And ultimately what it resulted in, I think for you and I, was really these kind of two practical questions. It's really one question with kind of a long tail, which I think you're passionate about. And the question is, what am I pursuing? Right? Vision is about this understanding of where I currently am and where I'm headed. But we can't really answer that question unless we really start thinking about what it is we truly desire.
Yeah. Yes, that's really well said, right? We've got to kind of look inside of us, and we can go all the way back to like Elizabeth Dixon's episode on purpose, our very first interview with her. And I think asking ourselves like, hey, where is it that I want to go? And what is it that I'm willing to give up to actually get there? Like, am I actually willing to commit to get there in the first place and to take action? Because I know that there's a lot of things that I've said that I wanted in my life. I wanted to be a professional football player. I had great intentions growing up of being a professional football player, but I didn't put the actions into actually making that happen. And I think that, man, at least for me, in my personal experience, I don't know about you, Brad, the fear of actually taking action is usually what gets me, what keeps me stuck. Like, I get stuck because I'm afraid that I don't want to fail. So in my team, I may have a great intention to put something in place that would help my team, some guardrails. In my personal life, I may have the idea that, hey, I really want to go after something. But for me, I often get stuck on the action piece because I'm afraid to fail. Like, that's where the rubber actually hits the road, from an idea and kind of like this thought of, okay, what do I want? And then actually putting it into action. So for me, it is about, okay, am I willing? I put this quote up the other day. There's a lot of people that have said different variations of this, but it was John Wayne, right? Said, hey, courage isn't the absence of fear, but it's being scared to death and saddling up anyway. That was my best John Wayne impersonation. And that's it, man. Realistically, like, that's where I've been in my life. Like, that's where I've been. I've got, our audio listeners can't see, but in order for me to get there, I've had to like write down what I'm going to do every day and what I'm actually committed to go after that vision that I have for myself of building a company and doing all those kind of things, and truly staying committed. And that's kind of the practical side. That's taken a little bit of the sting and the scariness away of going like, okay, this is a huge goal, but if I write it down and I see it, for some reason, for me, it becomes a little bit more tangible, a little bit more bite-sized, and I can actually start taking action on it, So that's been super helpful for me to figure out, okay, what do I want? Writing down what I'm actually committed to, and then going after that. So
that's right. One of our core values at the Daily Leader has been this principle of clarity, right? That great leaders create clarity. Yeah. And that's not to say that everything in leadership is always black and white. In fact, it's to say that oftentimes we have to exist in the gray area. You and I dialogue a lot here about paradox and how navigating the tensions of paradox is so important for leaders. But I think one of the things we would say about that is the outcome of navigating tensions, gray areas, things aren't seemingly very clear, is that great leaders actually work through those ambiguous and difficult situations and create clear decisions, systems, processes, and they bring clarity to them.
Yeah.
Right? That's what makes the leader different than the others in the situation.
Yeah.
And so what I love about what you're saying here is a commitment creates clarity. It separates a intention, a desire, a wish from a vision that's actually being achieved. What would you kind of spin on that?
Yeah, I think that's really well said. There's two parts. There's the vision. A, is my vision clear? Is it crystal clear? Like, is it so clear that I can't help but miss it? And I have no excuses, right? Like, is it that clear of, okay, hey, our company is going to hit, $1.3 million in revenue this year. Like, is it that clear? Or is it just, hey, I want to make some money this year? Same with personal commitments. Hey, I want to get in shape. Is that the vision? Like, is that what you're actually pursuing? Or you're like, hey, all right, in shape means I want to, I don't know, lose 5 pounds, bench press 100 pounds more and be able to run a half marathon. That kind of clarity where you know exactly what you're going to. When you have that, then yes, then actually committing to it is the second piece, right? And I think that both really go hand in hand. And I get a lot, and this is probably too much. We can talk about this from another time. I actually worked through with my coach, Adrian, about the racket that I get from confusion. So I often am confused on exactly what I need to do. And I get a lot from that of, I don't have to worry about actually hitting my target if I'm confused, or if I'm not exactly sure if it's in the gray. Then that actually, then if I don't miss it, like if I don't miss that, or if I do miss it, I have an excuse, is essentially what I gain from that. But the bummer is I miss out on so much when I do that. When I'm actually clear and can measure that, I feel so much more purpose, which is, I think, the whole question, and what am I pursuing, actually really helps us figure out what our purpose is. So, yeah, I loved it, man. That was good stuff. What about Tim? Tim gave us some great framework. Oh, well, actually, before I jump on, anything else that I missed there on Cory? Anything so we can wrap a nice little bow on that?
No, I think that was our biggest takeaway was, really practicing how vision translates into daily activity. We have to have clarity on what it is we want. And I would encourage each listener to go back and to really listen to that segment of Cory's interview where he talked about, the blind man seeking healing, or the paralytic seeking healing, which is kind of this old, ancient Bible story. And he just thinks about that story and kind of interprets it from this entirely interesting lens that I hadn't really considered before. And it leads you to really this question of like, hey, be clear on what it is you want. And if you're lacking clarity there, devote the time to teasing it out. He has this 5 P's tool he uses. It's super good. It's practical for anybody. So, I would just encourage the listeners to go back to that segment of that interview and really dive in there on, how they can discern what they want.
Yeah. Yeah. He does give a lot of practical tools there. And it was a great story. And the perspective of, hey, he asked him that question, which seems like it should be pretty straightforward, the answer, but it wasn't, hey, like, I'm going to heal you, right? He asked him, what do you want? Like he asked, the paralytic, what do you want? It's like, well, of course we know. We don't actually know. But, he asked him, what do you want? Which is a great question. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's all about taking the answers to that question out of the world of assumptions and into the world of like concrete commitments, which I appreciate you highlighting. But, Tim's interview was really, really interesting in its own way because it took this idea of leadership from the theoretical and basically said like, hey, leadership is not about your definition of it. It's not about, all these things, these things that we're talking about. It's really measured in who's following you. And I loved how like concrete he made the conversation. It was leadership. What is leadership, Tim? Well, it doesn't really matter. What matters is who's following you. So let's start there. You're not a leader if you don't have people following you. And where we took that conversation was to this framework about, well, how do healthy leaders actually create healthy cultures? And so go ahead and introduce us to that framework because you and I think both are excited about it and passionate about practicing it.
Icy hot framework, as I call it.
Is
that not what he called it?
Framework.
Icy.
No, it was ACE.
Ace.
His pronunciation is ACE.
Ace.
But the spelling is deceptive.
Yeah, it is. You can get a little confused, but it's pretty close. AICE framework. So acknowledge me, right? Inspire me, challenge me, empower. So and we've talked about healthy culture on the podcast a lot. And I think it's because it's it's a significant challenge as a leader of like, how do I do this? How do I actually create a culture that is healthy? That I've seen all these posts on LinkedIn that are like, hey, your culture is the way people feel on Sunday before they go back to work, like on Sunday night, right? Which I actually kind of like that. Like, hey, do they look forward to going to work? Are they dreading it? How do they feel? Like, that's a good barometer of, hey, are these people really engaged? Is the culture healthy? Is it a good place for them to work? Is it safe? All those things. So as we talk about
Sunday scaries are real, man.
yeah, totally. Right. And a lot of people don't want to go. And that's kind of always the case in our YouTube army that will hate on us and be like, a job is just a job. I'm like, that's fine. You're right. You're right. And this may not preach to you. So, click on to the next video, I guess. But
Right.
The whole idea to put some hands and feet to this, like acknowledge me, right? Acknowledge me. Like you have to know your team. Darren Hardy's the one that I heard once say on the hero's journey. Hey, if you don't know your team's hopes, dreams, and fears, you're not leading them. Like you're not. Like you can do, and we've talked about this a lot, you can do a lot of different things for your team, but realistically, the best way to create a healthy culture is to actually know them. And if you're not directly in charge of them, then make sure that whoever is their direct report really is in touch with their heartbeat. Like acknowledge them as a person more than just a number or whatever it is. Inspire me is kind of in that same vein, a little bit different, but like, how are you going to inspire somebody if you don't know them? Like you can inspire, you can give those mountaintop moments where you give the inspirational speech. And I think that's the picture of CEOs that we get. Hey, they're rah-rah leading the team, which is fine. And that is a really important part, but that's the mountaintop of inspire. The day-to-day inspire is I better know my team and what gets them out of bed, what gets them going. If I want to keep them inspired, challenge me is like the idea, right? Of, hey, if I've got X capacity, how do I say, okay, great, I know you're at X, and I want to get you to the next level. And the only way to do that, again, is to kind of, we're catching the theme, like really understand where your team is at, right? You won't actually know what challenges them, because if you don't know them, if you're not participating in their day to day, if you don't like kind of have the heartbeat of them, you may go, gosh, this is really challenging for them. And realistically, they're spending 2 hours on it at home and you've got no idea, right? And like, fine, that's fine if that's the way you want to run it, but that's a total loss in terms of potential for your company and for that individual. And then empower me, sometimes I say, hey, give them the keys to the castle and just see what happens. If we've done all these other things, hopefully we have trust. Cory had a great episode on that, talking about trust in companies. And so, hey, do we trust them enough to actually empower them to go, okay, hey, you got the framework. I think I know you. I think you're feeling inspired, you're challenged, and now like go do it.
Yeah, that's really good. I was actually going to bring up the concept of trust as well, because I think, we talk a lot about, closing the trust gap with Cory Shear, which we did an interview with him on. We talk a lot about the 4 stages of psychological safety from Timothy Clark. Trust Factor from Paul Zak is another really good one. These are resources that really help leaders to understand how to practically execute trust in their culture. But this idea of empower me assumes that we are risk taking on the people that are following us as leaders.
Yeah.
And that to me is like the actual test. The test of a great leader is my ability to launch them into their own leadership.
Yeah.
Right. So if I've done my job well, acknowledge, inspire, challenge, when it comes time to empower, I should actually be more certain of that decision, because I know I've done the other 3 requisite steps with excellence. And if I've not done that, then what it tells me is I've got to go shore up one of those other acknowledge, inspire, or challenge parts of the process. So great leaders, when it comes time to empower, are very eager to get to that stage, because they've built this person up to the point of being able to launch. I think what happens more often than this sort of ideal process we're dialoguing about right now is I hire you, I barely acknowledge, I don't inspire, I super challenge, right? And then when it comes to the empower part, it's like, it's a very, very truncated, it's a very fragile, brittle experience, because I basically have just thrown you into the fire without the kind of preparation and the kind of trust building that really needs to get developed and fostered in order for empowering to happen. And so, it's the corporate pigeon thing. I swoop and I poop, I get out of there, I delegate something, but then I never really ever let go of it. And then I burn you out because I'm making you miserable with either being completely absent or totally and completely overbearing and micromanaging. And so I just yo-yo as the leader back and forth between, totally absent and unaware to absolute command and control. And there's that's tale as old as time. I deal with that in my clients' working relationships and leadership processes day in and day out. We go to hire and then challenge, and it's like the inspire and empower get totally, kicked out the door. So I'm preaching now, but I'm sure just trying to make the point that, like, when we don't honor the steps of the process, like, we really, really screw up this last piece of it, which means the reason why we hired this potential leader, it never really comes to fruition.
Yeah, no, it's well said. It's well said. And the step that I'm going to take and conclusion that I'm going to draw from a result of what you said is most people don't know how to do the inspire and the acknowledge and therefore the empower, because they haven't had it for themselves.
Totally. Right? Agreed.
So if you are that person, if you're right now, you're going, man, how do I do this? Like, yes, that is the question to ask. How do you start doing that? Because I think it is super important. I heard it said once, actually, this was my old man that said this. He said, hey, a great leader is always working himself or herself out of a job. In other words, my goal is to pour into you so much that you take my job. Because if I'm doing my job well and I'm inspiring you and I am, challenging you and I am empowering you and I am like acknowledging you, then like, yes, you should take my spot and I should be doing the same thing moving up. That's the way, if we're going to live in a mindset that is like, man, we can all play this game. That's how it should go. Unfortunately, I don't think that most people live in that kind of mindset. I think they live in a scarcity mindset where they're like, man, somebody else is going to take my job from me. They're going to do it better. They're going to whatever. And so they just haven't seen that. They haven't seen somebody that is truly poured into them and cared about them. So yeah, anyway, I think you said that really well, Brad. I think you're right. The empower me is kind of the gauge. Like, how did all the rest of that go? If all the rest,
we're going to know. Rubber's going to meet the road.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Because it's like, here's the keys. How well can you drive this car? And if we've done our job well, you should be able to drive that puppy around the racetrack,
Yeah. And I should be able to sit in the passenger seat and not try to grab the wheel or stick my foot on the pedals. Right. Yeah. Like, I should be able to sit there and, and enjoy the ride.
And that may mean that there's some dings in the car along the way. Like, that's where the trust comes in, is like, right. Just like anything else, it's not going to be perfect. So yeah, they haul off and they take a corner too sharp and mess up a project on the way, there's an opportunity to learn. Right. So man, I think that's some good stuff. I loved kind of that framework around culture. I've been thinking about that way as like, okay, how do I do that? How do I get out of the mindset of do something in terms of something fun for people and what will be engaging, and more of how do I know my team? So I spend more time at the moment with certain members of our team, trying to get to know them and kind of thinking through that lens and trying to actually ask more questions, because I'm a talker, so that I can really learn what their hopes, dreams, fears are, and try and help them get to the next level of their career. So what about our boy Adrian? Man?
Yeah. That was such an interesting interview. It went in some directions we weren't expecting it to go in, but it was a lot of fun. My kind of like concise, practical takeaway from that interview was Adrian's definition of leadership, which basically fully sank into these paradoxes that we always talk about, which is generating results through other people.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of made the distinction of like, anybody can go get results, but the leader is going to go get results through other people. And so he kind of said great leaders do three key things. They generate results, they align a team, and then the one that we really talked about a lot was they commit to self-mastery.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we should kind of talk about how we've been engaging in self-mastery kind of along the way. And I think how we have kind of applied some of those ideas since that conversation.
Man, I mean, I get to spend some good time with Adrian. He is, he's my coach, and I think he does a really good job of helping me look at current reality. Like one of the notes that we've got here is you wrote down like, hey, current reality doesn't lie, but we do.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I hate
That's
that.
so good. Yeah. But he said this really interesting comment on that. He said, look, there's a difference between the story about what I'm up to as a leader and the impact of what I'm up to as a leader. And that our impact is the thing that reveals, right? Our intention is nice. It's important to know. It's important to recognize it, but we have to look at the impact that we're creating in our leadership. And so I really think he said so many interesting things about that we can dive into. I'm curious, like, how you're executing against this right now.
Yeah, I mean, how I'm executing against it, is, man, trying to get really honest with myself about my fears and challenges and the obstacles that I perceive are in the way. And I said that on purpose because one of my favorite books is The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Go listen to it. Great book if you're into Stoicism or curious about it. I think he runs the Daily Stoic as well, which is fantastic. But there's several ways. So in general, right now, I've tried to get really clear picture of where Taylor is at. And then actually going back to the question that Cory asked. So, hey, what do we want? And then not only what do I want, and what am I actually committed to making happen? Adrian and I we talked on the podcast a lot about rackets, right? And one of mine most recently was confusion as I'm building this out. The racket was, hey, the complaint that I have, hey, I'm confused with what I need to do next in my business. How do I keep building it? And what I actually got from that, right? In a racket, we say, hey, here's the thing. I'm confused. Okay. And what I get from that confusion, or the end result is I actually get to be right about my confusion, which my fear in that is, my business is never going to take off. I'm never going to be the person that I want to be. I'm never going to be the leader I want to be, you name it. But along the way, I get some payoffs in that, which is great. It's terrible, but it's great. And the payoffs are like, great. I don't have to do the hard work that I don't want to, right? I don't have to make those phone calls I don't want to make. I don't have to live in an uncomfortable world. I don't have to do those things. But the trade-off, what really hurts me is like, I often will feel, and this is the interesting part of the self-mastery for me that I'm learning. There's a gap between the vision that I want for myself and where I'm actually living my day-to-day. In that gap, for me, is depression and sadness and like, because I can see that potential of where I want to be living and know that I'm not living it out. And I've created an excuse to make sure that it doesn't happen. But I also get to be right about what the excuse is. So at least I'm right about something, because I'd rather be right than take the scary journey. That's been my self-mastery. And so the result of that has been, and by self-mastery, I mean self-discovery. And the mastery part is, okay, so what do I do as a result? Well, as a result, trying to get crystal clear on what I actually want. How many clients do I want? How am I going to go about that? All things that I actually know, write down. I've written them down. I've gotten really specific. And I actually use this tool. I put this up there and we talked about it before, but it's called the Daily Focus Tool. So I've got on this, I got my 3 big rocks of X amount of dollars that I'm going for per month coming into the business. Group coaching getting set up. I've got like, hey, we want to run this exponential leader event. So I've got like 3 things that I'm specifically making happen and making sure every day, everything that I'm doing is pointing towards that. And it sounds really simple. And it is, but it's also not easy, which is I don't think why I have done it much until now, which is the phrase that Adrian has given me, which I like. Until now, I've
Yeah.
operated in a different way. And if you want to operate in self-mastery, then we figure those things out. Let's get really clear about the crap that we're doing that we don't want to, that we've been tolerating. And let's try and move away from that into a healthier version. Okay, that was a lot of monologuing and a lot of preaching.
I think it's great. I think it's exactly what I was hoping you shared. The reality is that we're all engaging in various levels of self-betrayal, right? Which typically come from self-deception, and they result in self-sabotage, right?
Yeah.
So self-deception, self-betrayal, self-sabotage. And one of the great questions that he gave us was for us to ask this: what decisions have led to my current circumstances? And the point that you're making here is that we have sort of two choices, right? And we would obviously caveat this with like barring some serious victimization, like, for example, abuse, neglect, some crime committed against us. Like there are obviously examples to this, but by and large, when we're in work, dealing with relationship issues in our life, in our marriage, with our children, like we've either generated an outcome or we have tolerated an outcome. And we have to begin to see that process and that cycle and ask ourselves, okay, what choices can I make to create change? So the way that you're implementing this right now, and again, I'm just walking through the steps he walked us through on the pod, right? But your example is an awesome way that you've been executing against it. You're saying, if I can make a choice to create change in this aspect of my life, as you launch a coaching company, for example, getting crystal clear about what you want is that choice. You can get crystal clear about what you want, and that clarity and specificity and getting it out of your head and getting it written down and sharing it with your coach and sharing it with your co-founder and sharing it with, your friend, me, co-host of a podcast, and sharing it with our audience. Like, then you're going to get really committed to it. You're going to get really public and accountable for it. And I think that the hard part for me, and we talked about this really openly on our pod with Adrian, was I just don't want this to be true, Taylor. And I hate admitting that it is. Like, you said it really, really well. You said, I want to be the hero of my own story, and I want to save myself from being the victim of other people's bad behavior. Like, that's what I really want. I want to be like, oh, it's my wife's fault. Oh, it's my kid's fault if they just weren't so needy. Like, oh, it's Taylor's fault if he was just a better co-host, right? It's my client's fault. They were just better clients and paid more, blah, 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 blah. And I just resist this reality that, like, no, like, I generated this outcome, or I've really tolerated some bad behavior from other people because I've been fearful of having conflicts. It's like that black and white either or is just so difficult for me to acknowledge.
Yeah, it sucks. It sucks because I think most of us on the surface, we would go, yeah, that's probably not true. I'm not really blaming everybody else. It's not whatever, I'm not the victim. But then, like, when we actually get down to the brass tacks of it, there's really just reality, right? And the reality is, like, I have made choices that have led me here. And again, some of us, I heard it said actually in one of my counseling sessions once, right? We have all been victimized. That doesn't make us the victim. Like, victim where we own it and it becomes who we are. And I think that is subtle. It's a subtle thing. I don't think I always notice, but I would be the same way. I'd be in that camp a lot where I'm like, okay, yeah, well, I'm here for a whole result of reasons, and not going, I'm here as a result of the choices that I made, which is actually cool if you flip it on its head and go, if I got here by the choices that I made, then I can get there by choices that I'm going to make. Right?
Totally agree.
So that once we get clear with ourselves, like honestly, where am I at? Right? Where am I at? Why am I here? What have I tolerated that has gotten me here? Then we can get really clear on where we want to go. And for me, that's been so empowering because I can see that this, like, that tension that I was talking about left this feeling in me that just, like, kind of despair. Depression may be a little extreme, but I would say, some notes of depression when I was like, God, I always see kind of where I want to go, but why can't I get there? And I got all kinds of excuses, but excuses are like buts. everybody's got them and they all stink, right? So
Thank you for that.
you're
Yes,
welcome.
that was your token dad joke. Listen, what you're doing though is you're examining the root causes, right? And you're looking at, what he said is, look, he actually spoke about this with such transparency. Like, I have a shadow side, and you can tell me your observations about that, and you're going to find that I'm like, yep, I agree. Yeah, I see that too.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's true. I'm sorry that that's happening. I've experienced it, in multiple relationships. So my ability, Taylor, to receive your accountability, and again, see it as the opportunity. It's like a window or door, an opening into this big opportunity, right? To change and grow, and to be the person in the room who's the most committed to leading myself to self-mastery. Like, that's like the obstacle is the way, right? If I can examine those root causes and I can accept my shadow side, then I can begin the process of making the new choices, creating the change.
It's well said. To the level and extent to which we own the side of us that we don't want to own is the level and extent that we can own the new side of us that we want to go after. Like, if we can own where we are in our current reality, then we can actually own, I think, our future reality for ourselves. But if we don't do that, then we're still living in kind of this fantasy land, right? And where everything's not crystal clear. So what I liked. Do you want to move on to Jenn? Because that's what I was thinking. What I was thinking is Adrian's perspective change. Reminded me a little bit of Jenn's, because Jenn,
take us there.
We just talked a lot about parenting, and I feel like, I'm a new dad, so no complaints other than I don't sleep, and I'm not really parenting. I'm just keeping kids alive, which is great, and they're wonderful. But her reframe on a bunch of different things I thought was awesome. One of them, she talked about, right, this idea of shifting from, what was it, parenting, like she can love the kind of mom part and not necessarily all of the parenting pieces, which I actually like that reframe. Like, hey, I love connecting with my kids. I'm not as big of a fan of rules and guidelines and those things that I have to implement, which I thought was a great reframe. And I loved, and I want to get your opinion on, like she said, and we do this, talk about this a lot on the podcast, leadership is making sure that others feel seen, heard, and valued. And like our kids feel seen, heard, and valued. So how has her podcast kind of impacted you as well, as we are kind of wrapping up this episode here? I'd love to hear what Brad thought.
Yeah, I thought the parallels that she drew between organizational leadership and parenting, and honestly, how those two things influence us as leaders at the same time, was really powerful, because she talked a lot about her time as mayor and the kind of the mutual impact that her time as a mother of young, and I would say like preteen, teenage children had, like mutual impact on her work and her life. Yeah. And I think that the way that she talked about that felt to me very integrated. It felt very like whole, and it felt like someone who was attuned to either the inability to perfectly compartmentalize, or the way that the compartments actually back channel one another, right? Like, and we have like some super unhealthy ideas. Like, I'm totally a big fan of compartmentalization. Like, if you're a surgeon working on my brain, I don't want you thinking about the fight that you had with your wife, or the fact that your kids, stealing your car and doing drugs. Like, please keep that separate. Just focus on my brain, right? Right. If you're in the military and you're doing, crazy clandestine stuff, like, by all means, don't bring that home to your wife and kids. You just put that in a little bucket and deal with it later, right? You and your therapist, you handle that at another time, right? So I'm a fan of that. I'm a fan of, we have to learn how time and place influence the relationships and the circumstances that are in front of us in the current moment.
Right.
However, we have to be honest about the fact that, like, you're one human being, and you cannot pretend that there's no, my wife calls it bleed. She says, when I come home and I'm a total mess after a day of work, she's like, hey, that's, there's a lot of bleed right now. Like, why don't we reset here? Right. And she has so many emotions and so much language, and she helps me with all these things so much beyond what I would ever be able to do on my own. And I'm so deeply grateful for that, because Jenn was just this perfect example of a leader who is so attuned to how that bleed works and how we can leverage our professional experience and our parenting family experience to serve each area. And, her idea about, making others feel seen and heard and valued was really, really good, because it gave us language that you can do that work in any aspect of your life. It's not just whether you're the mayor or whether you're, wife and mom or what have you. And obviously that can be applied to, lots of different family situations, fix the language to the way that you need it. But recognize that we're leading no matter who we're with and what we're doing, and causing others to feel seen, heard, and valued is kind of baseline. This is where it starts.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said. There are some, I think compartmentalization gets a bad rap, and there is a really healthy way to compartmentalize. Like you said, if you come home and you just bring your whole day with you, there's times when you got to come home and chat about stuff with your wife, right? It's really important. Hey, can I process this with you? There's other times when you got to check that at the door and just be present for your kids. Hey, it's 5:30. I'm clocking out, and I'm clocking, back in
Totally.
to being fully present as a father or mother, because I haven't been with my kids. And so I was one level present earlier today with them, and then now I'm going to be a different level of present. I think that's super healthy. I think Jenn's views were just refreshing all the way around, right? How she sees people and how she treated them, which is why she's just like, all the people that we have on the podcast are like attractive leaders in the sense that they, people are gravitating towards them. And you can tell because they value the person. And Jenn even, I love that her superpowers kind of came out later in life, right? She talked about how she's really good at organizing, which isn't that much of a skill, you would think, when you're, 12, 13. Nobody is the big fan of the person that can organize their closet. But by the time you're in your 20s, that's a heck of a skill, right? And so she was kind to people the whole time that skill came out, and look at her just crushing it. Mayor, she's got her own firm. Just amazing stuff. So
I think, so great reminder that we asked her this question, like, are leaders born or made? And I thought that she, from her various vantage points, would have a great answer to this question. And she did talk about like how when she was growing up, there was she was very open biographically, which I felt was super helpful, because, the narrative of her leadership journey helped make some of the principles that she shared very real for me as we were talking there. And I think that recognizing that for those of us who sense this purpose of leadership in our life, it's at an early age or at an age where maybe it's early career, and we start to eye some of those executive skill sets that we see that they don't feel very tactile. They don't feel, we're rooted in, one particular discipline or knowledge or skill set. And we sort of see the big picture and how things can work together in the way that a lot of leaders do. I think we have to recognize that we just need to be patient with the process of our own life journey as opportunities to lead and to practice some of those natural inclinations and tendencies come out.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think any person who sort of starts as a kind of wired for it leader really, really wrestles with, and has a hard time just waiting for the opportunity to have the permission and the position of leadership.
Yeah.
So she did a good job of kind of talking about how different circumstances in her life, led to more and more opportunities where she was invited to lead. Like, for example, she was invited to run committees. She was encouraged by others who saw her leadership skills at the right time in the right place. They said, hey, you would actually be very gifted and very good at this work. And she was like, huh, I never thought about that. I never thought about running for, an office. I guess I'll do that. And because she came from a family where we asked, instead of, well, why would you do that? Well, we actually asked, well, why wouldn't you? Or, hey, you just assume you can do things. Don't assume that you can't, because her mindset was developed in that way. It was kind of like, I should run for mayor. Oh, why not? Yeah, I guess I'll just try this. We'll see what happens. And voila, she had all the raw materials and all the right circumstances in her life that led to her actually being successful in that role.
Yeah.
So I think there's just a really fascinating story and a really great example of someone who had the right raw materials, was wired in a certain way, and worked really hard to prepare herself for an opportunity when it came to the right time.
100%, man. 100%. I think that's well said, man. We had some great guests on. Oh, it was fantastic. I've taken away a ton. Like I really did. I always learn from the people that came on. I feel like in particular, these 4 individuals were exceptional,
Oh yeah.
Any parting words of wisdom for our Daily Leader podcast fans out there?
Just, go listen to these episodes. I think each one of them is really fascinating in its own way. There's some really interesting stories, a lot of just honesty and transparency from all 4 of these individuals who shared from their own life and circumstances, things that they learned from other people and things that they learned the hard way, making mistakes. And so my encouragement would be to go listen to those episodes. And I think if I could sum it all up, just one clear theme from all of these episodes, it's like, look, what do you want from your life, and what are you willing to commit to achieve that?
Yep.
Like that's how I would say it's like 2 questions. What do you want out of your life, and what are you willing to commit to achieve it? And if you can wrestle with those things, better yet, don't even listen to the pods. Just like them and share them. If you can answer those 2 questions, you can skip them.
Yeah, it's fair. Well said. This is a good way to wrap it up. I love that. Man. Love it. Well, Daily Leader listener fans out there, like, subscribe, tell your mother, your father, your sister, your brother about the Daily Leader podcast. Anybody else that I missed in there? And we will be back again pretty soon, next week.
Yeah, we've got an awesome slot of episodes coming here in the next month. So stay with us, guys. You're going to enjoy what's coming down the pipe.
That is right. With that, we will talk to you all again soon.